Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants, to this session of our Islam Study Circle. Today we are going to discuss the 35th verse of Surah Ahzab, which is the 33rd surah in our Quranic section. And I have titled this verse, which is a rather long verse, by the words better than the best. Actually, this verse, besides some of the other ones in the Quran, spells out some of the outstanding qualities that the Quran and the Almighty expects its believers to follow. The words of this verse are Innal Muslimina wal Muslimat wal Mu'minina wal Mu'minat wal Qanitina wal Qanitat was Sadiqina was Sadiqat was Sabirina was Sabirat wal Khashi'ina wal Khashi'at wal Mutasaddiqina wal Mutasaddiqat والصائمين والصائمات والحافظين فروجهم والحافظات والذاكرين الله كثيرا والذاكرات أعد الله لهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما. Men and women who submit, have faith, serve God, are truthful, patient, humble, who spend in charity, fast, guard their private parts, and persistently keep God in remembrance. For them, God has prepared forgiveness and a great reward. So, dear viewers, as you can see, this Quranic verse actually spells out some of the outstanding qualities of believers, and you can clearly see that the Quran has singled out both men and women by mentioning them with name and gender as well. So therefore, the stress here is that people who really are good believers, who are really good Muslims, should possess these qualities. And the first of them, it says, is Innal Muslimina wal Muslimat, men and women who submit. Of course, the word Muslim means to submit before the Almighty. So therefore, this is mentioned as an attribute of believers, that they submit to the commands of the Almighty. They are obedient to the commands of the Almighty. They are not people who depend on their own selves, or who are arrogant, or who don't listen to anyone. On the other hand, they are humble. They are ones who would like to submit themselves before a superior being. And of course, here it is meant that the Almighty is the person or the being before whom they submit themselves and do not override or do not disobey His commands. And the second attribute which is mentioned again with reference to both men and women is wal mu'minina wal mu'minat, that they are the ones who have faith. And of course, when it is said they have faith in such a way, it actually refers to the fact that they have true faith. They have faith in its essence, and they are the ones who really believe in the Almighty. They believe in the hereafter. They believe in the prophets of God. They believe in all the books of God. So all the tenets of faith are implied here, that in essence they are not ones who question these things. They in fact, through their own intellect, reach the conclusion that there is going to be a day of accountability. They reach this conclusion that someone has created them, and that they are not totally not responsible, or they are left untended like a herd which is not tended by anyone. And they believe in the prophets of God, and they believe in His angels, through which the Almighty has communicated to peoples and humans on earth. So, wal mu'minina wal mu'minat, they are true believers. They have this strong faith in the fact that someone is watching them, and one day they shall be held accountable before Him. And then it says wal qanitina wal qanitat, which means that they serve God. They actually are ones who show this submission before the Almighty. They bend before Him. They are humble before Him. They are not ones who disregard the commands of the Almighty. They always know their own place. They are humble servants of the Almighty. There is only one superior being, and He, of course, is the one towards who they submit. And then it says, وَالصَّادِقِينَ وَالصَّادِقَاتِ, that men and women who are truthful. And this is a very pertinent mention here, because one cannot imagine a believer, one cannot imagine a person without imagining the fact that he is a truthful person. He is a righteous person. He never lies. He always upholds the truth. Not only does he uphold the truth, he spends his or her life in pursuance of the truth, in the quest for the truth. He or she always sides with the truth and never ever gives in to untruth and to falsities. He or she always finds out or tries to find out what the truth is. He is a seeker and she is a seeker of the truth. And I would say that truthfulness lies at the bottom of all virtues. If a person is truthful, if a man or a woman is truthful, then he is bound to be a person who is always going to accept the verdict of the truth, whatever the truth is, even if it is at times judged wrongly by him, even then. And we have to remember that the Prophet has also told us that at times when you try to find the truth, you might not end up in actually finding the truth. The Prophet is reported to have said, Al-Mujtahidu yukhti wa yusib. At times when a person tries to find out the truth, he or she might not end in getting to the truth. But it is the effort that counts. It is the struggle which counts. So even if a person ends up at the wrong side, because he or she has tried her best or his best to find out what the truth is, the Almighty is going to reward that person. And then the verse goes on to say, وَالصَّابِرِينَ وَالصَّابِرَاتِ. Again, a very fundamental quality of a believer, that they are patient. And in Arabic, the word sabirina and sabirat, or the word sabr, is best translated as steadfastness or perseverance. That in the wake of difficulties, in the wake of hardships, believers, they remain steadfast. They do not complain in the times of trial. They always think that if they are being tried by the Almighty, then there is some greater wisdom hidden in this trial, because trials bring us closer to the Almighty. Trials make us stronger than before. Trials give us this opportunity to reap more reward by showing steadfastness and perseverance. So there are a number of positive aspects of facing these hardships and facing these trials. They also prepare us for bad times even better, because we become stronger than before. They increase our potential. So sabr, sabirin, sabirat, and the way it is mentioned here, of course, again tells us that true believers are one who are steadfast, who persevere in the way of the Almighty. Of course, when you accept the truth and you try to adhere to the truth, trials and tribulations and tests do come our way. And this is also one of the principles on which the Almighty has created this universe and this world, that He tries and tests our mettle. And when He tries and tests our mettle, He expects us to show this steadfastness and perseverance, especially in times of trial, in times of difficulties. And then, viewers, the verse goes on to say, وَالْخَاشِعِينَ وَالْخَاشِعَاتِ. They are ones who are humble, who are not arrogant. They are ones who are down to earth. And viewers, one of the greatest ways to remain down to earth, to remain humble servants of God, is to always keep an eye on our faults. If we keep an eye on our faults, we will be reminded how at times badly we behave, how some of the qualities that we may not be proud of we possess. And this keeps us in our place. This keeps us humble. This keeps us in check and stops us from being arrogant, stops us from preparing or pretending that we are not ones that we actually are. So one of the ways in which we can remain humble is to always keep an eye on our faults. And also another tip in this regard, dear viewers, is that let us always initiate salutations and greetings whenever we meet anyone, saying Assalamu alaikum whenever we meet anyone, and not wait for the other person to say Assalamu alaikum. This is also a sign of humility. It creates humility. Whether you meet someone junior to you, whether you meet someone younger to you, whether you meet a subordinate, in all cases, we must take the initiative in greeting the other person. And we must not think that since we are the older people, elderly people, we have to be saluted or greeted first. It should be the other way around. It should be like, as soon as we see someone, we should greet that person. And this, of course, is another way which keeps us humble and keeps us in check from actually pretending what we are not. And then, viewers, it says, وَالْمُتَصَدِّقِينَ وَالْمُتَصَدِّقَاتِ, which means they are those who spend in charity. I mean, men and women who spend in charity. And this, of course, is something which goes without saying. A person who is not concerned about the betterment of his fellow beings, a person who is not looking after other people, a person who does not have concern of other people, we cannot imagine such a person. He cannot be a good human being. And we have always stressed this, dear viewers, that unless a person is a good human being, he cannot be a good religious person. He cannot be a good Muslim. He cannot be a good Christian. He cannot be a good Jew or a Hindu or anyone. He has to be a human being, a good human being first. And one of the signs of a good human being is that he or she is always charitable. They are generous. Never think that they are better than other people. They are always people who think that they must concern themselves with the society around them. And this keeps them in check, and this keeps them connected to their fellow brethren. They don't shy away if they have small money. They don't boast if they spend in charity. Of course, they don't show this as a sign of their superiority that they do so. And also they do not express this as a favor to the person to whom they are good. And they are ones who, in times of need also, they are ones who spend on others. And then it says, وَالصَّائِمِينَ وَالصَّائِمَاتِ. So true believers are ones who fast. And of course here the stress is that not only the fast of the month of Ramadan, which is of course obligatory on all of us, here the stress is that they keep these optional fasts. We know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would fast 3 days each month, and of course other than that we also know that he would fast on Mondays and on Thursdays. He would also keep optional fasts on other occasions like the 10th of Muharram, and similarly the day of Arafat. And we know that on such occasions he used to do that because when we fast out of our own intention, out of our own will, we express our obedience to the Almighty. We express this fact that merely on the behest of the Almighty we are going to keep ourselves away from food and from drink and from sexual relations, because all these activities are the activities of our body, of our physical body. And the Almighty wants us to sacrifice these physical activities once or twice whenever we can, so that we are able to go deeper into our own spirituality. When we deny our body some water and some food and some of the other instincts, we are actually trying our spirit, our soul, to rise above these shackles and get this satiation, this fodder of our own soul. And the fodder of our own soul is, of course, a deep connection with the Almighty. The deeply we are connected to the Almighty, the stronger our soul becomes. And the best way to remain connected with the Almighty is to always remember Him as far as we can, through the prayer, through reading the Quran, through remembering Him on various occasions, as is the verse going to tell us as we go down. And then the verse says, وَالْحَافِظِينَ وَالْحَافِظَاتِ وَالْحَافِظِينَ فُرُوجَهُمْ وَالْحَافِظَاتِ. They are the ones who guide their private parts, which of course means that they are chaste people, they are modest people. They do not indulge in sexual activity outside of marriage. They remain confined to their own spouses, because this is essential for a good family. This is essential for the family setup to remain in existence. If we have extramarital relations, it sacrifices the well-being of a family, and therefore they have been prohibited in order to safeguard this institution, this wonderful institution of the family, because it is only a family which guarantees the well-being of a child which is born to every family. Unless the parents are devoted to each other, they cannot shower their love. They cannot come close in contact with each other in such a way that they can show themselves to be a one unit before their newly born children, and then of course try to educate and instruct them. And then the verse says, وَالذَّاكِرِينَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَالذَّاكِرَاتِ. They are the ones who persistently keep God in remembrance. And viewers, when we say that they are people who keep God in remembrance persistently, it means that they are always thinking of Him. They are saying Alhamdulillah whenever they feel this gratitude of being showered with the favors of the Almighty. They of course they say Astaghfirullah, which means God forgive us for our sins. They are ones who say MashaAllah when they see something brilliant. They say Subhanallah when they see the glory of God. So all these are words of remembrance, It's not just we remember God when we pray or when we fast or when we do certain rituals. Remembering the Almighty at various instances of our day is something that is required. Each time that we do some activity, for example, if we wear our clothes, if we look ourselves into the mirror, if we eat food, all these occasions are occasions on which we should thank God for what He has given us. And when we are thanking God for that, we are actually remembering Him for His favors, for His gifts that He has showered upon us. And remember, the Quran has said, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا, that however much we try to count the favors of God, we'll not be able to enumerate them. They are so, they are unfathomable, they are uncountable, they are innumerable. And let us always remember this tremendous favor of the Almighty, that when He created us in a way that we are given the best of molds. We are ones who are given good parents, clothes, a normal body, of course, which is something to be very, very happy about. And finally, the verse says, أَعَدَّ اللَّهُ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةً وَأَجْرًا عَظِيمًا. It is for such people who submit to the Almighty, who have true faith, who serve the Almighty, who are truthful, who are steadfast, who are humble, who spend in charity, and who guard their private parts, and also persistently remember the Almighty. All these are the attributes, and after enumerating all these attributes, the verse says, it is for such people that the Almighty has prepared forgiveness and a great reward. So let us be humble in triumph, and let us be patient whenever we find that we are facing some trial from the Almighty. Remember, trials make us stronger. Trials make us come closer to the Almighty. They prepare us for worse times, and also they give us a chance to come closer to our Creator, and also share some of the burdens of the people around us. When we go through trials, we get to know how people around us are actually going through these trials, and how in spite of going through these trials, they are still smiling, still hoping for the best, still participating in the activities of life, still not losing hope, still not getting frustrated. And they are the ones that we need to follow, look up to. And viewers, we find such people all around us. We find people who are badly hampered in their activities. They have problems, they have diseases, they have financial issues, but still they manage to smile. They manage to live a life which is a life in which they are thankful for whatever they have. Remember, it's never always the same for every person. Every person has his own or her own share of trials and her own share of tribulations. It is the way in which we encounter these trials which counts. It is the way how we look up and face these trials in their eye, and then of course we gather ourselves and we make this effort that we shall not get bogged down, we shall not lose hope, and come what may, we will try our best, because it's the effort which counts as far as we can. It's not the result, it's the effort and the struggle before the Almighty. So with these words, viewers, let's go to the next part of our study circle, which is the Hadith of the day. This Hadith has been taken from the famous collection Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Muslim. And let me read out these words before you, and after that we will be studying the narrative. So it says, عن أبي بكر عن النبي قال كنا عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال ألا أنبئكم بأكبر الكبائر ثلاثا الإشراك بالله وعقوق الوالدين وشهادة الزور وقول الزور وكان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم متكئا فجلس فما زال يكررها حتى قلنا ليته سكت. So Abu Bakr, a famous companion of the Prophet, is reported to have said, once we were with God's messenger, and he said, should I not inform you about the three greatest of the major sins? They are associating with God, disobeying parents, and giving a false statement or a false testimony. And while he was saying this, God's messenger, peace be upon him, was leaning on his support. He then sat upright and continued to repeat these words until we wished that he became silent. that he becomes silent. So you can clearly see, viewers, here that the three major sins are spelled out by the Prophet. Of course, when the question was raised before him, he said that I'd like to inform you about the three great sins which a person might commit, and the first of them is shirk, polytheism, or associating partners with God. Of course, this is something that the world has remained alive to many centuries ago, before the coming of Christ, I would say, and even before that, we find the world sunk in the filth of paganism and polytheism. There were so many gods. Romans had so many gods. The Greeks had so many gods, and so many other gods we can find in the Far East as well. It was this revolution which was actually brought about by the prophets of God later on, and finally when Jesus came right at the start of the first millennium of modern history, we can see that he was the one who actually lit this torch of monotheism in his society, and ever since then, from his time till the time of the last prophet, was the Prophet Muhammad, this revolution in favor of the creed of monotheism was completed. And because of the fact that people, when they committed polytheism or they were guilty of this sin, the Almighty says that the reason that it regards them to be guilty of this, and the reason that it regards it to be an unforgivable sin, is that there is no proof of polytheism. Had there been other gods, the best person or the best being to inform them of these other gods was the Almighty himself. And without he informing us that there are other gods, without he informing us that there are some other partners that we have, if we impute partners to God, then we are doing something of our own wish. We are actually imputing falsehood to God. That is why the Quran says that shirk or polytheism is iftara Allah. It is a falsehood imputed to God, because we could have had no knowledge that the Almighty has a partner unless the Almighty himself conveyed this to us, and he never did so. That is why the Almighty is very severe and very harsh for people who deliberately deny the existence, who deliberately say that there are more than one God. And therefore, this is the reason the Almighty says that everything else can be forgiven, but a person who intentionally indulges in polytheism is a person who will never be forgiven on the day of judgment. And this is the reason. And next, it says that disobeying parents, akukul walidain. And here it needs to be understood, dear viewers, that in the Quran, we do find the fact that wherever parents are mentioned, at all places, the words which are used are treat your parents with kindness, wabil walidaini ihsana, which of course means that we have to be very, very gentle, kind, and sympathetic to them. We must not infringe on their rights. We must not be people who disobey them regarding their own rights. And here, disobedience must not be taken in the meaning in which it is generally taken, and that is, people think that the rights of a person, it himself or herself, can also be infringed by the parents. Just for example, people think that if the parents decide for the children regarding their spouses or their careers, and if the children do not obey them, then they would be disobeying parents, as is said here. This is not correct. The disobedience which is mentioned here is regarding the rights of the parents themselves. For example, if a parent is in a certain age in which he or she needs your compassion, he needs your company, he needs you as a dependent, and in those times you deny your parents these rights, it is this which is called ukuk, or disobedience. However, if your parents insist on a certain spouse or a certain career, this is something, if you disobey, is not disobedience of the parents, because this never comes in the rights of the parents. This is the right of the person himself or herself. So this is a point of note that we must all make, that parents themselves do have their rights, but they do not have the right to force their opinion on their children or on their surroundings. They, of course, can give their suggestions, they can pass on their experience to their children, but they cannot deny their children their own basic right, their own basic human right. And the word ukukul walidain, or disobedience of parents, must not be construed to mean that if a grown-up child does not listen to his parents or her parents regarding spouse selection or career selection, then he or she would be disobeying the parents. This was not the case. As I said, disobedience here actually refers to disobedience regarding the rights of the parents. And then it says false testimony. And false testimony here, as you can clearly see, is something which all of us need to be very careful of. Because when we are bearing witness, we are in fact making the Almighty our witness. We are subjecting ourselves to the fact that this and this is the truth for which I bear witness. And for this, we know what the Quran has told us elsewhere. It has said that we must bear witness to the truth even if it is against our own interests. وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوِ الْوَالِدَيْنِ, even if it is against our parents. So such is the nature of this testimony, this bearing of witness, that if it goes against our own interests, if it goes against the interests of our parents, of our relatives, of our kin, of our country, anything, it must not be succumbed to. It is the truth to which we must succumb. It is the truth that we must acknowledge, even if it means that we have to lose a lot of our wealth, or even some part of our own lives as well. So truth has to be held superior in all cases. And at one place the Quran has said that you have to bear witness to justice and to truth even before your enemies. لا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا. You cannot be unjust to your enemies as well. Even for them, you have to bear witness to the truth. And subhanallah, this is one of the outstanding barometers and parameters which the Quran tells us, that even to our enemies we must not be unjust. We must not bear witness to injustice. And I don't think there could be a higher standard than this, which has been set by the Quran, and here it has been explained by the Prophet himself. And you can see from the last part of this narrative, dear viewers, that the Prophet kept on repeating it. He said, the narrator says, Abu Bakr, who's the narrator, he says, when the Prophet was saying this last part, that do not bear false testimony, do not bear false testimony, he was laying back, he was reclining, and when these words were spoken, he suddenly came forward and started to repeat these words over and over again. And look what the narrative tells us at the end. فَمَا زَالَ يُكَرِّرُهَا حَتَّى قُلْنَا لَيْتَهُ سَكَتَ. That he repeated this so many times that all of us wish that, all of the companions wished that he would go quiet. He would stop repeating these words, implying the fact that the Prophet stressed so much that giving testimony which is closer to the truth is so important. And I think that it goes without saying that bearing witness to the truth is fundamental to all practices. It is fundamental to our basic the human being in us. And we do pray that the Almighty does not bring us into such a trial. But if we have to pass through this trial to bear witness to the truth, then let us brace ourselves. Let us gear ourselves for the fact that if there comes a time in which we have to testify to the truth, come what may, even if we have to lose our own life, even if we have to lose a better part of our wealth, even then saying the truth will be something we will always uphold. It will always be dearer to us than every other thing. Now let us go to the third part of our study circle, dear viewers, and this is the Bible verse of the day. And this time there are actually more than one verse. In fact, 8 verses from the Gospel of Luke. This is chapter number 12, and I have titled it as Jesus Warns Against Greediness. As we all know, greediness is one of the biggest ailments that we human beings can suffer from. It actually makes a person blind to the needs of the society. He becomes an irresponsible person. A person who is greedy is always worrying about amassing wealth. He has no concern about the people around him. So here's what Jesus is reported to have said. So I'm just going to read out this passage before you. And one of the people said to him, Master, give an order to my brother to make division of the heritage with me. But he said, Man who made me a judge, a maker of decisions for you. And he said to them, Take care to keep yourselves free from the desire for property, for a man's life is not made up of the number of things which he has. A man's life is not made up of things which he has. And he said to them in a story, the land of a certain man of great wealth was very fertile. Now Jesus is actually recounting a parable, which he often does. So here comes the parable. The land of a certain man of great wealth was very fertile. And he said to himself, what is it to be done? For I have no place in which to put all my fruit. And he said, this I will do. I will take down my storehouses and make greater ones, and there I will put my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have a great amount of goods in store, enough for a number of years. Be at rest. Take food and wine, and be happy. But God said to him, you foolish one, tonight I will take your soul from you. Who then will be the owner of all the things which you have got together? So that is what comes to man who gets wealth for himself and has not wealth in the eyes of God. It's such a beautiful ending to such a moving parable. So that what comes to the man who gets wealth for himself and has not wealth in the eyes of God. So the point of caution, which of course Jesus is making here, is that this greed, this avarice, this an internal urge to gather more and more is found in ourselves. And we keep on thinking that we have to gather more and more without thinking that there is going to be an end to our own lives, and that whatever we have gathered is going to stay here. And as there's another narrative that says that when a person comes back after actually putting some of his relative in the grave, the only thing which remains with that person who has died are the good deeds which he has taken with him to the Almighty. All his wealth which he has amassed is going to stay in this world, and if he has not used that wealth for the betterment of the society, then it's going to be a stigma. It's going to be like a bad patch on his own afterlife. So viewers, the beautiful way in which Jesus has actually guided us here is that we have to keep our wealth and our account with God. As is said by Jesus elsewhere, it is reported to have said that he said that keep your wealth where your heart is. And if your heart is with God, then your heart will always be with your wealth. So we have to make note that instead of greed, instead of being selfish, we have to be selfless. We have to practice the selflessness as far as we can. We have to look at others. We always think of our own selves. I, my future, my family, my children. So let us also look at other people around us. Let's not be so tunnel visioned, so narrow-minded, so narrow-visioned that we don't find people immediately in our surroundings, people who might be our relatives, people who might be living in our homes, or who are friends, who are our associates, who are in fact people who are really in a spot of bother. And instead of recognizing them by their faces, instead of looking after them, we are busy in amassing wealth for our own selves. May God help us, and may God protect us from this ever-increasing desire to gather more and more. If we have to gather more and more, then let it be for the cause of God. Let it be for the people around us. There is no harm in accumulating wealth as far as we think that accumulated wealth is not only going to serve us, it's also going to serve the society that we live in. So there is absolutely no harm in gathering wealth if the purpose of gathering that wealth is not only to feed ourselves in a reasonably good way, but also to look after the needs of the people around us. So viewers, with these words, we come to an end to the first segment of our study circle. And if you have any questions, kindly please proceed with these questions. I'm going to unmute your mic in case you have a question. And if there are no questions, then we'll proceed to the second part of our study circle. I can see one of the hands being raised up. Okay, it's Ms. Rafia Khwaja. I'm going to unmute your mic. Kindly please proceed with your question.
Dr. Shehzad, my question is that Allah has said that there is no force in religion.
Right.
You can accept it, you can deny it. Then could you please tell me why did Allah inflict such severe punishment on the people who rejected the messages of the different Rasuls he sent in the world, who addressed the people, and when they rejected their message, Allah inflicted all sorts of punishments on them.
You see, the meaning of this word, like Ra'af ad-Din, or man sha'a fal yu'min, man sha'a fal yakfur, means that the Almighty has not forced a person. He has not compelled a person to adopt a truth. This is all that it means. It does not mean that if he adopts the wrong path, then he's not going to punish him. So what the Almighty is telling us, that He has not actually handled us or taken us forcefully to what the right path is. He has given the option to our own selves. So it is up to us to choose what the right path is, and up to us to choose what the wrong path is. However, if we choose the wrong path, we have to face the consequences. So these are two entirely different things which we must not relate to each other. One thing is that we have the freedom of thought to choose between good and right. And the other thing is that if we choose good, we will be rewarded. And if we choose something wrong, then of course we will be punished for that. So the consequences are something entirely different. However, the choice is ours. So this verse actually is relating to the choice aspect only. It's not relating to the consequences of the choice. It's like saying that if you do something for your own benefit, of course it will be of your own benefit. But if you don't do something for your own wrong, it will be for your own wrong. But the choice is ours. Like saying, for example, if a person smokes a cigarette, we cannot stop him from smoking. Of course, he knows that the evil effects of smoking are going to affect his lungs and his family also. So if we give a choice to a person to smoke or to do anything, it actually means that he or she has the choice to choose. As far as the effects of that choice are concerned, they are going to be there. So we must not confuse the effects.
I'm interrupting you, sorry. What I meant was when he said about Iman, the messengers brought certain messages from Allah to the people,
Right,
to accept Allah as a Tawheed and reject shirk.
right.
And when they did not accept them, then He destroyed those nations.
You see,
That is what I'm saying.
right,
That if He had given us a choice,
right.
why did He destroy the nations?
You see, these are two different concepts that must not be related. One is the aspect of punishing people for their wrongdoings. This particular verse does not relate to that. This particular verse only tells us that in this world, until the Almighty has given us the respite for the messengers of God, this respite was till their own lifetime, and for the rest of the people, it is till the day of judgment. So, as far as the respite is concerned, it is there for us. But it tells us that as far as the choice that we make, then that's something which is going to affect ourselves. And as far as this verse is concerned, it does not relate to that aspect in which a person has to make a choice regarding his religion, and then as a result of a wrong choice, he is punished in this world. That's an entirely different law of the Almighty, and this particular verse does not relate to that particular law. It relates to the general law in which a person can choose to be a good person or a bad person, or to adopt faith. It's like telling us that we've not been compelled from our inside to do what we think is right, or we have the choice to do the right, or we have the choice to do the wrong. So this particular aspect just tells us that we have the freedom to choose right and wrong. We are not compelled by the Almighty to choose what the right is.
That Prophet Nuh, Prophet Saleh, the different prophets who came,
right,
when their message was rejected, He told them to leave, and then He inflicted all sorts of
right,
rain, tiddas, blood, and destroyed them. But when He says in the Quran that I'm not forcing you, you accept it, it is up to you to have belief in me or you don't. But then His prophets gave the message, and then all those qawmi were destroyed. That was
yes,
puzzles.
I do understand, and of course, this is how it happened. That is what I'm exactly trying to say. You see, the verse only tells us that we are not compelled from our inside to do what the right is, what the wrong is. It's our own choice to accept the right and the wrong. But the consequences of accepting right and wrong, they are not dictated by this. They are dictated by an entirely different law of the Almighty. You must not relate the two with each other. If people got punished because they accepted, if they did not accept the truth, it was after the period of respite that they were given, and for them the law was that if they would accept, of course they would be rewarded, or else they would be punished. So la ikraha fid deen, and words like these, verses like these basically tell us that it's our own choice to accept what right and wrong are. But if we accept wrong, then of course there is going to be some consequences, whether they're going to take place in this world or in the next. So that's a separate thing. I gave you this example that when I say you choose to smoke, whether you smoke or you don't smoke, it's up to you. It's like telling you that you have the choice. But when you smoke, of course, you know that that's going to be very bad for your health, and you might ultimately, God forbid, have cancer and even die for that. So the consequences are something else, and the freedom to choose something is an entirely different thing. This verse is just telling us that we have the choice to choose, but the choice and the consequences of that choice, they are of course going to affect us, and that's an indifferent thing. Okay, we're now going to move ahead. Okay, as far as the second part of our study circle is concerned, we are now going to take up some of the contemporary issues that we often speak about and talk about. Today, viewers, I'm going to present before you an aspect of the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which tells us how, in spite of being a prophet, he was still a human being. And in spite of being a prophet, he was a person who had emotions, who was not a superhuman as far as emotions are concerned, because at times we are given this impression that being a Muslim means that we should become devoid of emotions, of happiness, of joy, of sorrow, of grief that we may come across. The Prophet's and the example that I'm going to give you today is regarding one of the incidents which took place in his own life, and that is the death of his young son Ibrahim, who was born of Maria the Copt. And he was very young. He was an infant, the child, when he was dying. And when he actually died, the Prophet was called over by the people and said that he should express or see his dead child and pray for him. And what happened was, when the Prophet came to his slave lady Maria, and when he saw that the child was lying dead there, he started to cry, and he was so taken aback by the situation that tears welled up in his eyes, and he started to cry. And the words that he spoke at that moment are simply historic. He said something to this effect, that my eyes are welled with tears, my heart is struck with grief, but I feel myself content with the will of God. Al-ainu tadma wal qalbu tahsun walakin arzi bi rizallah. Something to this effect, that my eyes are tearful, wal qalbu tahsun, my heart is laden with grief, but I am satisfied at the will of the Almighty. And this actually tells us the balance which we have to maintain. Religion does not tell us that we should not be grief-stricken, we should not feel sad when we come across these sad situations. No, it does not. It says that to feel these emotions, to cry at such instances is but natural, because all of us are human beings. Remember what the Prophet said, my eyes are well with tears, my heart is struck with grief. So this is how we express this normal human sentiment, that whenever there's something wrong, whenever we come across these situations, we do have this phenomena in which we feel very, very sad. But in spite of this sadness, look what the Prophet said at the end, that I am happy with the will of God. I am satisfied, because there is something which is with the will of God that perhaps today I'm not being able to gauge, I'm not being able to understand, but there is something good which is hidden in this incident. Therefore, I'm content with the decision of God. So in spite of being very, very sad, in spite of being grief-stricken, in spite of being sorrowful, which a person can be when some near one passes away, we have to feel contentment in our hearts that whatever happened with the will of God. In other words, the point that is being made here is that something when happens, whenever some grief comes across us, it's not that we should stop our emotions. It is not that we should not cry, because crying is also a mercy of the Almighty. It gives us that relief. The Almighty and the Prophet, the way he conducted himself in this incident, tells us that we are not required to control our tears or not to cry on such instances. Of course, crying is something which comes naturally to us on such instances. The only thing that we need to do is try to remain as calm as possible in a while in which we think that whatever has happened with the will of God. So we have this beautiful balance that is being taught to us by the Prophet, that on one instance, or on one hand, you can be a person of your own emotions. Whether you're happy or whether you're sad, you can express them. But if you're sad, if you express your tears, if your tears come out of your eyes, it's but natural. It's not expected for you to remain a stoic person, and you should not be tearful. What is expected is that in spite of these tears, we are people who are still happy with the will of God. And I think this is a balance that we all have to strive for. This is a balance that we all must try our best to attain, because this is what a human being is. He or she is a person who has a personality which is afflicted with good or bad emotions, happy or sorrowful emotions. And at the same time, whatever happens is something on which our heart should remain content sooner or later, because we think that whatever is happening by the will of the Almighty, and in the grand scheme of things, something is auguring well for us, which at the moment we might not be able to understand. And I think this part of the seerah is something that we must keep on rehearsing every now and then, because it tells us how a human being is, and how a human being is not expected to be superhuman, and he is also not expected to be a person who should give up himself to grief in such a way that he forgets his creator, that he forgets that what has happened because of a certain cause, and because of the fact that he or she is being tried and tested by the Almighty. So with these words, dear viewers, we come to an end to this second part of our study circuit as well. In case you have any questions regarding the second part, I'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, inshallah, we'll meet next Saturday at the same time. And I see there are no questions. So, dear viewers, take care of yourselves. Inshallah, see you next Saturday at the same time. So, it's Khuda Hafiz from here.